Wow, we are thrilled to be here, and I know climate change is a top concern for you. That's why you're here early this morning. That's why I'm here. That's why the governor's here. That's why Senator Schatz put so much work into this. That's why Vice President Gore will be here tonight. Well, the purpose of this conference is to lay out a roadmap for Hawaii to move forward with clean energy and smart growth, green building. In other words, to make sure you're sustainable. It's an important challenge. You know, Hawaii is at ground zero on climate. And so the issues that you are addressing and the solutions you will continue to come up with, Governor, are going to be critical. Now, I am very proud of this state because you have been so proactive in addressing climate change. You can't say that for a lot of places. Since 1998, when Hawaii developed an initial climate action plan, your state has moved forward with efforts to reduce emissions and to adapt to climate change. Hawaii has some of the strongest standards in the country to increase the generation of electricity from renewable resources. Your goal to have 70% of your energy from renewables by 2030 is the leading goal in the nation today. Your state requires a new single-family home to have a solar water heater. And I really do want to congratulate you. You have a lot of work to do. We all do. But it's good to take a minute just to reflect on how far you have come and to build upon that progress. You love this state. This state is spectacular. It's special. And we have to make sure it survives. Now, everyone here knows, I think, I haven't taken a poll, but I think everyone here knows that climate change is real. Am I right? You don't have a question. Good. Well, that's one difference right away from the U.S. Senate. You know that human activities are the primary cause of climate change, and you know that the warming planet poses a significant threat to our people, to their health, and to the environment. Now, that is not my opinion. That is the opinion of 97% of the scientists. For decades, scientists have made predictions about the impacts of climate and what will happen if we fail to address it. In the 1990 Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and that was their first report, we were warned that temperatures will increase at a rate greater than seen over the past 10,000 years and over 5 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of the century. 2 weeks ago, the IPCC issued a report that adds a tremendous sense of urgency for action on climate change because the impacts are already being felt on continents across the world's oceans. The report identifies the serious threats to human health, food and water supplies, vital infrastructure, and the world's economy that will multiply as the planet warms and climate is disrupted. The lead author of that report said, and I'm quoting, "We're now in an era where climate change isn't some kind of future hypothetical. Impacts from climate change are already widespread and consequential," unquote. According to another co-author, that co-author said, quote, "Things are worse than we predicted. We're going to see more and more impacts faster and sooner than we had anticipated," close quotes. And just 2 days ago, the IPCC said that we have a path forward using the latest cost-effective and high-performing clean energy technologies to cut carbon pollution. In other words, it was good news in that report. We do have a path forward. But the longer we wait, the harder and the costlier it will be. So your timing is impeccable. We know we have a horrific problem, and we know we're getting the tools to solve it. All we need is the will. A study published in the peer-reviewed journal Nature in January estimates that the planet will reach far greater levels of warming if we don't act. They're talking about 7 degrees Fahrenheit, 7 degrees Fahrenheit by 2100 if we don't act, and the consequences of that are unbelievable. So we see that climate change is becoming a reality. I say sometimes to my colleagues, look out your window. You may not be able to see Russia, but you can see climate change. Oh, some of you got that. Oh, good. I've always wanted to say that. I never. It wasn't in these remarks, Bettina. So here's the thing. I have been privileged to be the chairman of the Environment Committee, and as such, we've had the most incredible experts come before us. And so what I'm hearing now from these reports is really just kind of an echo chamber of what I've known for many years. That the impacts of climate change include record-breaking warm temperatures, dramatic losses of Arctic sea ice, and Stu and I went up to Greenland. Literally, you can see the ice just moving and just melting in front of your eyes as they break off. It's an amazing experience. If you haven't done that, if you need convincing. We're seeing devastating floods, growing intensity of hurricanes and extreme weather, bleaching and drying coral reefs, and increases in wildfires and droughts. In my state, the drought is very, very, very severe. Right here in Hawaii, we know overall rainfall has declined, and when you do have heavy rains, they tend to be more intense. They tend to trigger flash floods, mudslides, significant infrastructure impacts that isolate communities. We also know that warming oceans are impacting local reefs and marine life, and that sea level rise is harming beaches, causing coastal erosion and increased coastal flooding. Yet, with all this in front of our eyes, and yes, outside the window, we still face deniers. Let me be clear, and if there's anything you take away from this speech, I hope it's a couple of things. I hope it will be this one. The level of scientific certainty on man-made climate change is about the same as the consensus among top scientists that cigarettes are deadly. In both cases, it's about 97% of scientists. Now I want to talk a little bit about the tobacco industry and their concerted efforts to convince people that smoking was great for their health, or certainly not a problem. Some of you may remember that up until the late 90s, tobacco industry scoffed at the best available scientific evidence, proving that tobacco is addictive and tobacco causes cancer. Year after year, the tobacco industry refuted the science that showed the link between cigarettes and a threat to human health, as well as the Surgeon General's warning that nicotine was as addictive as heroin. Let me share a few of the statements made by or on behalf of the tobacco industry. And as I say them, think about the climate deniers and what they say, okay? A 1970 Tobacco Institute advertisement disputed the scientific findings that there's a connection between cigarette smoking and cancer, saying, quote, "The Tobacco Institute does not, and the public should not accept these claims at face value," unquote. In 1971, Joseph Coleman, chairman of Philip Morris, said, quote, "We do not believe cigarettes are hazardous. We don't accept that." In 1988, a lobbyist for the Tobacco Institute said this, "In sum, there's no medical or scientific basis for viewing cigarette smoking as an addiction." At congressional hearings in 1994, do you remember the executives standing up there with their, how many remember that photo? With their yeah. They said they believe nicotine is not addictive. That's a quote. And a tobacco industry doctor said, quote, "The proposed addiction warning and the assumption upon which it is founded are based neither in science nor fact and will have unintended harmful results." In 98, Walter Merriman, vice president and chief spokesman for the Tobacco Institute, said, "We don't believe it's ever been established that smoking is the cause of the disease." But here's the thing. The American people and elected officials eventually got on board. And we were all on the same page and agreed that nicotine and smoking cause cancer. And we took steps together to encourage tobacco cessation. And here's what happened. In the percentage, okay, In 1964, 42% of people smoked in America. Do you know what that number is in 2012? 18%. So what happens when we listen to the science, when we stop all the partisanship, when we agree to move, we can make a tremendous difference. But you have to know this. Investigative reporting has clearly ascertained that those who led the fight against health warnings on tobacco were involved in the climate denial movement from the beginning. The American people must understand this, and now you understand this. And you know who's on your side in this battle. Now, I'm going to remind you of some of the more memorable quotes on climate from a few former Republican presidential candidates. All right? In 2009, Representative Michelle Bachmann said, quote, "Carbon dioxide is not a harmful gas. It's a harmless gas. And yet we're being told we have to reduce this natural substance and reduce the American standard of living to create an arbitrary reduction in something that is naturally occurring in this earth." By the way, arsenic occurs in this earth. She didn't get that. Texas Governor Perry said in 2011, "I think we're seeing it almost weekly or even daily, scientists who are coming forward and questioning the original idea that man-made global warming is what is causing the climate to change." So he doubted it. And then this, one of my favorites, in 2011, Rick Santorum, a former senator colleague of mine who was running for president, here's what he said. Follow. "I believe the earth gets warmer, and I also believe the earth gets cooler. The idea that man, through the production of CO2, is somehow responsible for climate change is, I think, just patently absurd when you think of other factors. El Nino, La Nina, sunspots, moisture in the air. To me, this is an opportunity for the left to create, it's really a beautifully concocted scheme because they know the earth is going to cool and it's going to warm." That was Rick Santorum. And then Steve King, who got right to the point, "It is not proven, it is not science, it is more of a religion than a science." Okay. Now, by claiming climate change doesn't exist, deniers not only try to refute what scientists have been warning us for years, they're also going against the will of the American people. According to a USA Today poll, an overwhelming majority of the American public recognize that climate change is real, it's happening now, and there is strong support to address this growing threat regardless of party affiliation. Americans know we have a problem. They want their government to act. One poll says, and this is really interesting, young people, they consider that something like 18 to 34. Brian, you're getting old. One poll says young people think deniers are either ignorant, out of touch, or crazy. That's a hopeful sign. And others say and we know there's very strong support in both red and blue states for the Environmental Protection Agency's effort to limit the amount of carbon pollution that power plants release. There's been a remarkable shift in how some of the nation's biggest corporations view the threat posed by climate change. More than 700 companies that drive our economy, including Microsoft, Owens Corning, General Motors, the Portland Trail Blazers, and the candy maker Mars. They've signed a declaration calling for national action on climate change. This is good. It's also making it more of a puzzle to me, because when you consider the scientific evidence, 90% of science, the strong consensus among the American people way in the high 60s, low 70s, and many large corporations, you'd think then there would be in the Senate and in the House a clear path forward to address climate change. But something terrible has happened since I first got into office. Protecting the environment has become a partisan issue. It's terrible. And I got into office so long ago, I started at a very local level on the Marin County Board of Supervisors. I went to the House, then the Senate. And in those early years, you couldn't tell a Republican from a Democrat when it came to two issues, the environment and a woman's right to choose. There was complete agreement. And now it's gone in the opposite direction. So on Capitol Hill, I was initially very optimistic because in '92, a month before I was elected to the Senate, 2/3 of the Senate voted to ratify the UN framework on climate change. In '08, Brian mentioned this, 54 senators supported tackling climate change. And in '09, the House actually passed the cap and trade bill. But unfortunately, in just a few years, those of us who want to take meaningful action have been forced to turn our attention away from getting a price on carbon to protecting our landmark environmental laws, including the Clean Air Act, which, by the way, thank God for that, gives us the tools that we need to address climate change. It doesn't do anything near what a price on carbon would do, but it is very, very helpful. Now, because it is very helpful, Brian and I and others, Senator Whitehouse, our Climate Action Task Force, we have to work to defend the current Clean Air Act. I'm trying to remember this right, and Bettina will correct me if I'm wrong, but in the last Congress, 98 times they tried to repeal various provisions of the Clean Air Act, and the only place that was stopped, and they did in the House, we stopped them in the Senate. And this year alone, it's in the 20s, 28 times. And what that means is, because they know they've blocked us on getting a price on carbon, their new way is to repeal parts of the Clean Air Act. If we lose that ability, we're in major trouble. And that's why this particular election, just to mention it, is so critical, because this is what is at stake. When I gave Senator Schatz his award, I said it was from the Senate Climate Action Task Force. And I wanted to just mention, because I know you care so deeply about this, that on May 21st at 4 p.m., you're all invited to join us in a Wake Up Congress rally in Washington, D.C. We won't be speaking all through the night, but we'll be gathering at the Capitol. For those of you who can't hop on a plane and spend, how many hours, Brian, going to Washington? 10. You can do a rally here synchronized to 4 p.m. our time. And what time would that be here? -6. What does it get us to? 10. Okay. 10 a.m. It's a great time on your coffee break. And what we'll do, well, probably an hour later than that, we'll set off all of our alarms on our phones simultaneously all across this country, so that we send a message that Congress needs to wake up, and we have to go back to a time when Republicans and Democrats work together on issues that are so plain on their face that need action. You know, when we walk away from protecting the environment, we really walk away from the health and safety of the American people. And we don't, that's just not rhetoric. We know there's a place in this world where that has happened. It's called China. And in China, we see what happens when you throw the environment under the bus. I have a photograph, it's just shocking, of the people there walking outside in masks. You can't see anything. You don't want to ever see the air. And they see the air. It is so polluted. And it's actually causing political problems in China. Now they're claiming they're going to clean it up. But remember, if you can't breathe, you can't work. So anyone who says that protecting the environment isn't an economic issue or clashes with it is wrong. You can't develop. Remember when the wall came down in Eastern Europe, they found out that they had the worst, dirtiest air ever. And they immediately started to work to clean up the air because they couldn't develop and they couldn't maximize their production capabilities. So here's the thing. China, listen to this. According to a scientific study from the Health Effect Institute on the leading causes of death worldwide, outdoor air pollution in China contributed to 1.2 million premature deaths which is nearly 40% of the global total. So when somebody tells you that there's no difference and it doesn't matter, especially, Michelle Bachmann's comment, oh, carbon pollution. Carbon, it's naturally occurring, it's nothing. She obviously didn't read the endangerment finding, which started under the Bush administration, and this is what it said in part. Climate change can affect ozone by modifying emissions of precursors, atmospheric chemistry, and transport and removal. There's now consistent evidence from models and observations that 21st century climate change will worsen summertime surface ozone in polluted regions of North America compared to a future with no climate change. Now, that's a fancy way of saying, if we don't address carbon pollution, our air is going to get dirtier and dirtier and dirtier. So anyone who tells you that carbon doesn't cause a problem and cleaning it up won't have any benefits, co-benefits to our air, is absolutely wrong. It's a wide range of benefits. In my wonderful state, in 1976, there were 166 days in Los Angeles when health advisories were issued to urge people with asthma to stay inside. That's a lot of days in a year. In 35 years, the number of smog-related health advisories dropped from 166 days in 1976 to, you know how many days in 2010? 0. This is amazing. This is because Democrats and Republicans worked together. We passed the Clean Air Act. We carried it out. We did it in a smart way. We had tremendous economic growth in that period of time, and we cleaned up the air. Amazing work by our predecessors. And I will tell you, if we don't address carbon, all that progress will be reversed. Because when we cut carbon pollution, we reduce so many types of air pollutants, and we'll benefit by having cleaner air to breathe, and we will save lives. In Washington, D.C., I told you it's bleak, but we are moving forward in our way. Senator Schatz joining the Climate Action Task Force. And by the way, you may not know this because he is a humble man. Quietly behind the scenes, I hope I'm not saying something I shouldn't, Brian teamed up with Senator Sanders, and they spoke to the head of these various networks and said to them, you are not doing enough to carry the issue of climate change. I forget, when you get a chance to tell them how many times there have been stories on climate. It was like in one outlet, one of the big networks, 5 times in a year, twice in a year, 2 minutes in a year. And they went quietly, and they got commitments, and we're beginning to see a little bit of life there, a little bit more attention to this. But the fact is, we really do need a gold standard bill, like the Sanders-Boxer bill, which puts a price on carbon. It's a fee, and 60% of the revenue goes back to taxpayers as a bonus. Just in case the utility bill goes up, we can protect that, because in the beginning, it could be passed on. And the rest of the money goes to reducing the deficit, promoting renewable energy, enhancing job growth, and increasing the resilience of our infrastructure, something that Governor tells me he's looking at here. When something is doing such great harm, you got to put a price on it. It's just as easy as that. When there's a price on carbon, it will reflect its true impact. Think of the impact we're already seeing. And then clean energy becomes the preferred and clear choice, becomes competitive with the dirty energy, and it will help us avoid the devastating impacts of climate change. So we're trying. We don't have a lot of support for this because of the nature of what Sheldon Whitehouse calls a barricade of lies that have been set up around the Congress, and I quote him on that, very similar to the tobacco industry lies at the time. So we can't do that. What can we do? We turn to the president. He's been terrific. Raising gas mileage, advancing forms of low carbon fuels, promoting clean energy like wind and solar, improving energy efficiency on many fronts. You may not know this, the federal government is the biggest landlord. So I have a bill that would say, all the buildings that we own have to be the most energy efficient as possible. Remember, these create jobs that cannot be exported. They're here. You would have to have a really long arm to put on a solar roof all the way from China. They have to happen right here in Hawaii, right in California, and all our states. So again, a healthy environment and a healthy economy go hand in hand. Now, we believe the efforts being made by our president, which we've been able to protect in the Senate, so they keep moving forward, the fuel economy, less pollution on cars, energy efficiency, better standards for existing power plants, we believe it will put us on track to reduce our nation's carbon pollution 17% by 2020. But that's just the beginning. Now, there's just one or two other quick things I want to talk to you about. And there is one thing that we should not do. And I may be going against some of you here. I really don't know, because I never vet what I'm going to say. And sometimes I'm surprised. We should not build the Keystone XL pipeline. We should not do that. Now, so the right-wing radio says, Barbara Boxer says the pipeline causes cancer. No, it's the tar sands that run through it. That's the problem. Tar sands oil, much more carbon intensive, producing 17% more carbon per barrel than domestic crude. And if the dirty tar sands oil is produced for the Keystone pipeline, it will open up production even more. Right away, it will be a 45% increase, and eventually, by 2030, a 300% increase in the importation of this filthy, dirty oil, the filthiest known to humankind. Now, there's a growing concern about the harmful impacts of tar sands oil. I, along with the Senator White House, have written to Secretary of State Kerry asking for a comprehensive health impact study on our people as to what they would face with more tar sands oil. And I'm proud to tell you, we've been joined by 3 incredible organizations in this. This does not get much coverage. We are battling the battle. The inevitability of the Keystone pipeline. But we are fighting hard. We've been joined in this request for this detailed health impact studies of the tar sands by the National Nurses United, which is the largest professional association of registered nurses, 185,000 nurses. And I will tell you this without even knowing. If you put up the popularity of any one of us electeds next to the nurses, you know who wins. So when you're standing there with the Nurses Association, it feels pretty good. And then the American Public Health Association, they are the oldest and most diverse organization of public health professionals in the world, joined us in asking for this detailed study before a decision is made on Keystone. And then the National Association of County and City Health Officials, which represents 2,700 local health departments across this nation. So I'll say just quickly, and then I'll move to my last point about California. They wrote to Kerry, the national nurses, this is what they said. Our organization concurs with Senators Boxer and Whitehouse that what is known today about the health hazards associated with expansion of the tar sands could well be just a sampling of a much larger set of significant risks to human health. Nurses believe the health consequences of Keystone have been substantially ignored in State Department final impact reports and needs to be addressed. Now, what I've learned by meeting with doctors from Canada is that misery follows the tar sands, misery. From where it is extracted, people are getting cancers that they didn't expect to see, one particular type of cancer, and then you move it along. The transportation, the fact that you could have a spill. The refining in places like Port Arthur, Texas, where they already refine it and people are getting very sick. And then the pet coke, petroleum coke, which is the end remaining product that is stored above ground, and it's all over, for example, places like Chicago, where some kids were sitting after a Little League game, taking a break, and suddenly a wind kicked up, and they were covered in soot and had to run away. Do we really want to increase the importation of tar sands 300%? And not even look, and by the way, it all gets then exported. It's not going to stay in this country. It's a point that most people don't know. So while I view Keystone as a lose-lose, I view addressing climate change as a win-win. Wind, hydropower, solar, that accounted for over half of the new electricity added globally in 2012. Let me say that again. This is the good news. In 2012, renewables led by wind, hydropower, solar accounted for half the new electricity capacity added globally. Now, we're proving this in California, and you know, I bragged about Hawaii. I have to spend just 30 seconds saying that California is also a leader here, Governor. We are moving forward. We have a comprehensive plan. We have a cap and trade system. We have fuel economy standards that are the absolute model. The equivalent of 54.5 miles per gallon will be the model for the nation as a result of us. 2025, 15% of the cars sold in California will be powered by electricity or hydrogen fuel. We require a 10% cut in the amount of carbon in fuels by 2020. Since 2011, carbon reduction in fuels has resulted in the equivalent of taking 500,000 vehicles off our roads. So California, yay for California. And I want to say it because I mean it. We are a huge state, 38 million and counting. We would be about the 5th, 6th economy in the world. The oil companies came in and they tried an initiative to repeal all of our laws on the books, and they failed. Because you know what? When you really think about what this is, and you make the connection between the deniers over history and those who are on your side, you come up with the right answer. And I pray for this country that we do, and as well for the world. So now for the words that every senator says and people really get excited. In conclusion, I have a couple of rhetorical questions for you. And even if you're young and you don't have kids, I know that most of you are looking forward to that time. So I ask you, what is the right thing to do for your children and your grandchildren? Should you save if you can for their college years or let them drown in student loan debt? Should you pull your child from an oncoming vehicle or wait for someone else to do it? Should you keep your kids at home when there's a massive hurricane warning, or should you bring them to a safe shelter? We all know the answers to these questions. There's no ambiguity. And there should be no ambiguity as to whether we should take steps now to avert the worst impacts of climate change. It is the right thing to do. It is the moral thing to do. And here's the great news. Clean energy is good for our lungs. Energy efficiency is good for our pocketbook. Both create good-paying jobs that can't be outsourced. And as we move forward, we will make sure consumers are protected. That is the right thing to do, and that is the moral thing to do. Hawaii gets it. California gets it. Many other states get it. President Obama gets it. And I do believe, as the voters across this great nation assert their will, someday soon, the House and even the Senate will get it. And then, and I like to think positively because that's the kind of person I am. That's why I've been in this business that I'm in for so long, and that's why I'm here today. When we do the right thing, our nation will lead the world in deeds and in actions, and we will save this planet. And after all, isn't that our ultimate responsibility? Thank you very, very much for the honor of speaking to you today. Thank you.